Hi, and welcome to another Luminar AI tutorial. I'm Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor. In this video, I'm going to talk all about contrast and how to control it using the tools inside of Luminar AI photo editing software. I'll demonstrate how to reduce contrast in a high contrast image so that you can retain detail in the highlights and the shadows. Then you'll see how to add contrast to a dull and lifeless image to give it more punch. This is day 2 of my 5-day photo editing challenge. If you'd like to follow along and get access to the raw files so that you can practice, just sign up using the link in the upper right corner of the video. Without further ado, let's get started with today's lesson. If you enjoy this video, please remember to like it and subscribe to the channel. For the demonstration in this lesson, I'm using Luminar as a standalone product, but you can also use it as a plugin for Lightroom and Photoshop. If you're not sure how to do that, just go to the Luminar menu and install plugins. Once they are installed, you can then open the image from Lightroom or Photoshop into Luminar, and it will work just like any other plugin you use with that program. In this first image, we're going to be looking at how to reduce contrast to retain the details in the highlights and the shadows. To view the image full screen, I'm just hitting F on my keyboard for full. Let's take a look at the before. So \key, you can see that the area in the sky on the left is very bright, the sign is blown out, and the side of the wall and the vines on the wall are very dark with very little detail. Let's take a closer look at that area. You can see the after, there's lots of detail in the vines and the sign in the sky, and before, very contrasty, dark, and some areas blown out. Just hit the space bar to zoom out and F to resume regular screen viewing. So I'm going to reset this. If you are working on an image and you make a mistake, they have a history panel on the Luminar AI software. Just go over to the right and you see the little clock icon. This is a history. So what that means is everything that you've done to this image so far using Luminar AI has been recorded. So you can go back several steps and just pick an earlier version, or you can revert completely to the original. That's what I've done here, so we can start from scratch. To get out of the history panel, just choose the tools panel on the top right here. It looks like little sliders going back and forth. Make sure you've updated your Luminar AI to version 1.01. If you don't see these color-coded tools here, it probably means you just haven't updated. So just go to Luminar AI and check for updates, and you should be able to install the new version. You'll notice that they've moved things around a little bit, and the Enhance AI tool is now at the top. This is the one that Skylum recommends you start with. So if we look at this one first, Accent AI will analyze your image and try to make changes that it thinks you need to make for this image. So let's see what it's done. I like to go all the way to an extreme with the sliders, see what they do, and then come back somewhere in the middle. In this case, it's done a pretty nice job. If we zoom in again to that problem area, it's done a really good job of retaining detail in this ivy or this wall here with all the plants. Still blown out a little bit on the highlights, but we can probably work with that. So right out of the gate, one slider has done that. It's pretty good. The next one down, the Sky Enhancer AI, will do the same type of analysis to your image, but working only on the sky area. So if there is no sky in your picture, you'll note this slider will be grayed out. So I'm going to take it all the way to 100 just to show you what it does. It's really saturated and intensified the sky, but I think it's gone a little too far. So if you watched the video for day 1 yesterday, I talked about what is over editing, and you have to be careful, number 1, of saturation. Oversaturation will make the image seem unrealistic, and the first thing that people will see is that you've edited it. My personal belief with photo editing is that you want to use it to enhance your images, not fix them. You want people to look at your image and say, wow, that's a great image, or that's a great picture of a winery, for example, in this case, not, wow, that's really great editing, right? So you want them to see the picture and the subject, not your editing. So the idea behind the editing is to enhance, not to take over. So I'm going to scale the sky one back a little bit because even though it's doing a really nice job, I could probably pick up some of those details in other ways without gaining that extra saturation. But the Accent AI, I'm going to leave pretty high because it's done an exceedingly good job here. And literally, I'm just going to continue down the row here. I'm going to do a little bit of a quick crop just to straighten the tilt. So this first button under perspective here will straighten if you've got something tilting. So I'm going to do that. And I want to come in a little bit closer so I can get rid of some of this base here, the bottom of the parking lot. I don't need all that. So hit enter to accept the crop or just close the composition tool and it will be applied. Moving down, we're going to go to the light tool next. Don't have anything to erase in this one. I'll cover that in a future video. Once we're in the light panel, you'll see that it's all about different tonalities. We have highlights, shadows, blacks, and whites. And if you don't see this panel, there's a lot of sort of close and open, advanced, or hidden panels inside of Luminar. If you see a little arrow like this, just click it to open that panel. I'm also going to turn on the histogram or show the histogram. That is under the View menu, Show Histogram. In this case, I want to affect the highlights. So highlights are areas that are just slightly darker than pure white. So I'm going to bring the highlight slider to the left, which is darken. So to the left is darken, to the right is light. So you can see that it's affecting this sign and the sky area and doing a good job. If I go the opposite way, you can see that it's increasing the brightness of the highlights. So going all the way is where I want to go. Next, I might boost the shadows a tiny little bit, but just to show you what you want to avoid doing, you want to avoid doing something like this, which is what I would call neon puke. Okay, so it's my term for overprocessed, oversaturated, over HDR'd, if you want to go with that term, because now there's no shadows, and what was the shadow area is now the same tonality as what was the highlight area. So logically, your brain isn't going to register that correctly. So when you are adjusting things and correcting for shadows and highlights in a contrasty image like this one, make sure that you don't completely remove the shadows. Okay? Shadows are your friend. And you want to have shadows in your image because it creates more depth and dimension. So the goal here is detail, but not removal of the shadows. Watching my histogram, I can also turn on what's called the clipping warning with the J key. So clippings, just to bring this highlight up for a minute, the clipping warning will show you areas that have no detail, meaning that they've gone off the graph either at the top end or the bottom end. So anything that is red, like you see here on the sign and the lights, means that it's white with no detail. Anything that is a blue marker shows black with no detail. So generally with highlights, you want to make sure that you've got detail everywhere. But if you have a light source like this, a light bulb or a sun or something like that, keep a little bit of the clipping, or it's okay to clip the light source itself because you wouldn't expect the sun to have any detail. In the shadow areas or in the blacks, keeping it a little bit clipped will actually give you more contrast and saturation. I want to show you a little demonstration. Let's take the black slider to the left, which is going to darken it. Okay, so we're going to go all the way to the left. Watch what happens to the color of the buildings and the sky. You know, I'm going to a severe extreme here to show you what it does, but you could see that the orange is really intensified on the building, and look at the sky. Now we really have more of that neon look that we're trying to avoid. So watch when you're adjusting the blacks that you want to have a little bit of clipping because it will make your image have more depth and punch. Don't remove the blacks. Just know that there's a dance that you have to do back and forth between adjusting the contrast and adjusting the saturation, and sometimes going back and adjusting the previous setting again and tweaking it a little bit more. I'm just going to reset blacks for the moment, and I'm going to show you another tool that you can use to affect the tones in your image. This is the curve. If you're not used to using curves or what they mean or what it looks like, you'll see that there's a graph in the background that looks suspiciously like the histogram. That's because it is. On the left of the curve is black, and on the right is white. Now you might say, Darlene, it's not a curve, it's a straight line. That's correct. So a straight line is basically an unadjusted curve, right? So it's what's called a linear curve or a straight line. If you adjust it more into the shape of an S, so you may have heard that term S-curve. I talked about S-curve and some of these other photo editing terms in another video. Click the little link in the upper right corner of the video if these terms are unfamiliar to you. So with a steep S-curve, meaning that now the curve is in the shape of the letter S, you get a lot more contrast added to your image. Okay, so if you go the opposite way and you create a flattened S-curve or an inverted S-curve, right, you're going to flatten the image out. The curve gives you a lot of control over how you can adjust the tones in your image from the highlights, which are up here, to the shadows, which are here. Or if I get rid of these, midtones are in the middle, is like exposure, right? You can also do things like bringing up the side, which affects the blacks. I'll do another video in the future on curves because it's a complex subject. But just know for now that curves is something that you can use for tone control as well. I'll put my black slider back. Let's move down to the panel and correct the color. So obviously we're going to use the color tool for that. Make sure this bottom part is open if you don't see it. So there's two things here that you can try. There's the remove color cast slider, which does a decent job a lot of the times if there's a color shift in your image. But in this case, we just have too much color, so it's not doing what we want. I can lower the saturation. If you're not familiar with the difference between saturation and vibrance, refer to that photo editing terms video again. But the short answer is saturation is the intensity and it applies equally to all colors in your image. Vibrance applies mostly to already subtle or muted colors. So I'm going to bring the saturation down overall just a little bit. And then I'm going to go to this bottom part. So HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. Okay, if you pull down this little menu. Luminance is equal to lightness or brightness. In this case, we're concerned with saturation, so I'm going to choose that one. And I'm mostly interested in the saturation of the sky, which is blue. So I'm going to pull that slider to the left, which is minus. You can see if I take it to the right, it's increasing. So I'm going to bring the blue saturation down a fair bit. Now, are there other colors applying in this sky? Maybe I want to see if there's any purple and actually enhance the sky. You can see that's affecting the clouds and doing some nice things. Or maybe I want to lower the yellow saturation because of the lights on the building. You can see what that's doing. Let's bring that down a little bit as well. So you really can start to work on tone control of specific colors this way. If you go into the luminance pull down, you can adjust the tones. So now I can still darken the sky further, or darken or lighten the purples. And the same with the yellow. So if I want to darken the sign a little bit. Let's see what this tool is doing. Just hit the toggle to turn it off. So we've gone from neon to more acceptable and more realistic. Next, we're going to go all the way to the bottom. Scroll your tool panel all the way down to the professional section. They are green. And we're going to work with super contrast. Here, they've divided the tool into highlights, midtones, and shadows contrast. So again, we now have control in very different ways. So how I like to use this tool is I will turn up this first slider, the contrast slider, or which is the amount, pretty high, right? So that I can see what it's doing. Now, well, look what's happening over here on the sky. It's doing a fantastic job, but it's kind of flattening this area out. Then I will use the balance slider. Okay, so if you go to the left with this one, it's going to lighten things. So it's opposite of what we were doing before. Now the left is lightening and the right is darkening, okay? But only in those highlight areas. You'll notice that the sign is being affected, the sky, and this area on the building, but the rest of the image is pretty much untouched. So I definitely want to darken the highlights, but not that much. So I'll bring the balance back to closer to center and bring this amount down. So how I often use the tools is I take them to extreme, see what it does, and then come back in the middle somewhere. I'm going to settle about there because I really like what it's doing to the sky. Not so much what's happening up here, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Then I'm going to do the same with the midtones contrast. And I've played with this one a little bit, and I didn't really think it was something I needed to use on this image, so I'm going to leave that one at 0. Shadow contrast, okay, same applies here. If we go to the right, we're darkening. If we go to the left, we're lightening. So we've already done a lot of adjustments on the shadows on this image. I don't think I want to add shadows back in because I just removed them, right? Let's see what this is doing. I really want to just work on the highlights in this particular tool. I really like what this tool is doing on the left side here on this part of the sky, but not what it's doing in the upper right corner or on the building or the sign. So this is where masking comes in handy. So click the middle little icon here on the tool. So the right one is disable, mask, or reset. So click on the masking tool. It looks like a magic marker. Once it's open, you have a choice of painting in or painting out the effect. What I recommend here is choosing either the paint tool or the erase portion of the mask based on how much you have to paint or how big of an area you want this tool to apply to in your image. In this case, I only want it to apply to a very small area. So if I use the erase tool, I'd have to erase it off 90% of the rest of the image. So I'm going to use the paint tool and just paint it in to the part that I want it to apply to. I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit, and that's always generally a good idea because then you're just painting it in layer by layer. So like you would if you were painting a wall or a room in your house, you don't take the paintbrush, dip it in and get a big glob. You take a little bit of paint and you do a light coat, then you come back and you do a second coat later. So it's kind of the same idea, you build it up. So I've got my opacity set under 50. I've got a soft brush. Now what that means is the circles here, I'll just make it bigger so you can see them. The space between the two circles, the inner circle and the outer circle, is that feather region. So it means that if I have a hard brush, so the softness set to 0, for example, if I paint with a hard brush, you will see the edge in the picture. So if you don't want to see the edge, keep the softness all the way up to 100. So I'm just going to make the brush a little smaller. Now I'm using the square bracket keys. You can use the left one to make it smaller and the right one to make it bigger. And I'm just going to paint in this area right here. Okay, now remember, it's only going to apply to the highlights because that's all I've dialed in here. You can see it starting to take an effect. I'll just paint a little bit more. So let's see what it's done. See how it's only affecting that small portion of the sky, which is exactly what I want. I think I'll do one pass over the sign just to pull out a little bit of detail there. And maybe a little bit more in the sky. And we're good. So to turn the mask off, just click it again. Super contrast off, on. Perfect. The last one I'm going to apply here is the dodge and burn tool. Dodging and burning are terms that actually come from the days of film and darkroom. I used to do this myself because I did my own darkroom work. So dodging is a technique that was used to hold back light or lighten an area. Burning was a technique that was used to add more light or darken an area. So the same applies here, and they've just used the same terminology. What I'm going to do with the dodge and burn tool is I'm going to darken the bottom area of this image. Now I could add a vignette, which I do to a lot of my images, but I only want it to apply to the parking lot and this right-hand side here. I don't really want to darken the sky anymore because it's going to start to look more unrealistic. So I just want the bottom part. So the best way to do that is the dodge and burn tool because I can literally paint the darkness in where I want it. One tip with this is it doesn't give you the fade or the softness like the other slider did. You'll notice on the other one with the mask, we had the softness slider. This one just has size. So I can make the brush bigger. But if you want to affect that fade area, hold your shift key down and then use those square brackets. And that will change the amount of fade. Okay, so if I'm doing a harder brush, let me just show you what happens. And turn the strength all the way up. If I paint with a hard brush, this is what happens. Right? If I paint with a soft brush, okay, so there's a bigger difference between the circles. you see more of a gradation between the painted area and the unpainted area. Let me just undo that. So I'm going to use a soft brush, and I'm also going to turn the strength down to about 10. I recommend leaving it really low with the dodge and burn tool because it's really easy to overdo it. And just start to paint and do like I said, if you're painting your house, layer it up. Okay, so I want to darken these areas at the bottom here because I want to bring the viewer's attention more into the winery and the motorcycles and less on this parking area. Maybe even these rocks in the background here. So you can literally just paint in where you want the darkness to appear. And just keep going until you're happy with that level. Notice I'm doing small little clicks, little by little, and building it up. If I wanted more detail in some of the dark areas, you can also use the lighten part here, which is the dodge tool. So if you have another area where you want to bring more detail, let's just zoom in to this area here, and I'll just show you how it works. Same idea. So if I'm lightening, you can see that I'm bringing more detail into these leaves, but I'm doing it really gradually because I don't want it to have a hard edge and I want it to be not noticeable. Close the tool to apply it. I'm going to turn the histogram off so we can see the full image. Let's go full screen and see the before and after. So before, sort of a lack of color, loss of detail in dark and the bright areas. Sky is sort of bland. Now we have lots of detail everywhere, lots of color, maybe even still a little bit too much color in the sky. So I'll probably go back and dial that back just a little bit more. So once again, doing that dance of making some adjustments, going back to the color tools. If you're with me so far and you're enjoying this tutorial, please remember to like it and subscribe to my channel. Let's get to the next image, which is all about adding contrast. The second image was shot in Japan, and I really was drawn to the textures and patterns in the carvings on this monument. So I wanted to bring them out with a bit more contrast and punch. The original was very flat because it was taken on a very overcast, cloudy day. This is how the original came out of camera. Now let's take a look at doing the opposite that we did to the first image and how to punch the contrast up in this one. I've already reset the history on this one back to the original file, and you can see that I've cropped it in a little bit. If you're following along and have my files for the 5-day photo editing challenge, you can choose to crop it or not. Up to you. Once again, I'm going to start with the Enhance AI tool. And as I mentioned, the sky enhancer is grayed out because there is no sky in this image, and the program is smart enough to know that. So Accent AI all the way up to 100 again. This one does a really nice job. Overall, I think it's great, with a few exceptions. It's brightening the background as well, and it's bringing out detail in this bottom area, which I might not want. But overall, when we zoom in, it's doing a really good job of giving it that extra punch right out of the gate with one slider again. So if all you did was that, it's a big improvement. I'm going to scale it back just a little bit. Let's maybe go to about 80. So remember the masking trick that I just did on the last image? I'm going to do that here as well. Because I want the viewer's eye to go to this middle ledge with the carvings and the moss and not the background or the bottom part that's lacking interest, I'm going to mask it. And once again, I'm going to paint in, lower the opacity a little bit, get a bigger brush, and I'm going to paint it in to just this top level. Okay, so you can see what's happening now is I'm giving the extra punch here, but it's not affecting the whole image. Now if I want to apply it overall a little bit, I can just turn down the opacity and say, well, I want a little bit down here because I want it to match better. So I'll just go all over the whole image a little bit and close the mask, close the tool. I'm going to come back to that mask in a minute because I'm going to show you another trick that you can do with it. I'm going to do the composition again real quick. correct the tilt because I think it's crooked. Yes, it is. And I want to come in close enough to get rid of this highlight on the bottom left corner here, but I want to make sure that I have the edge of this column. Okay, so there's kind of a fine direction of cropping here, about like that, maybe a little tighter. Accept the crop. So let's look at the before and after. Again, I like to frequently look at what I've done so far to see if there's something that I've already overdone or maybe I've missed. Close the composition tool and open the light tool. Let's open the histogram again. This one for me is a little bit bright overall, so that's the exposure slider. Remember that affects your midtones. So I'm going to darken it overall just a tiny bit. And let's see if we have any clipping. So I've hit the J key, so we have no whites clipping, only a tiny little bit right there on that one leaf, so I'm not too worried about that. But we can pull the highlights down. But I do want to have a little bit of black clipping, remember, because we want to have some extra punch. And look what happens to the colors once again. Now we've got a few of those blue areas starting to clip. And look what happens to the color as soon as I do that. Okay, so remember our dance. Contrast, color. So now that I've applied this, I'm going to have to go and adjust the saturation. But before I leave this panel, I want to adjust the white balance. So I could try this little targeted adjustment tool here. There's a little eyedropper up where it says white balance. You could try one of the presets like cloudy, a little bit too much green, or shade, a little too much yellow still. Or we could try the eyedropper and click somewhere on this concrete, assuming that it's fairly neutral. And now that's done not a bad job. I find it's a little on the pink side. So I'm going to dial the pink down a little bit, go more towards green, and give it a little more yellow, as opposed to having the greens appear more bluish. And that's just a personal preference as to how I like my foliage to appear. So we're getting close. Next, let's go down to the color panel to fix our saturation problem. So once again, I'm going to go to saturation and dial down the green, but also the yellow. Okay, so you'll notice that when you're dealing with anything natural, grass, leaves, foliage, it has both yellow and green. So you're going to want to use both sliders until you get the look that you want. And I'm also going to adjust the hue. Okay, so the hue is the tint. In this case, if we go to the left with the green slider, it gets more golden. You can see that it goes to extremes, and what it's doing is affecting the green tint of anything that picks up green in that image to the warm side or to the cool side. So I'm going to go a little bit warmer, and the same with the yellows as well. So you can really do things like change this into a fall scene even if you shot it in the summer. So if you ever shot something in the autumn and the leaves weren't as orange and red as you wanted, hue and saturation sliders are going to be your friends. Quick before and after. I like the direction this is going so far. Close the color panel. There's another tool up here in the Essentials panel called Structure AI that we didn't use on the first image. So if we open that one up, it's kind of like Clarity if you've used that slider in Lightroom or Photoshop. So I'm going to drag it all the way to the right, again, just to see what it does, and then all the way to the left. I'm going to leave it at 100% and come back to that Enhance tool that we applied earlier, because remember I said I had a mask trick for you? Open the mask and click these little dots here on the right. So when you do that, you have the option of copying this mask, and then we can paste it into the other tool. So let's do that. Copy, go over to Structure, open the Mask tool, 3 dots, and paste. You can also show the mask by hitting the / key. So I'm going to do that so you can see what it's done. So it's applied the same mask, meaning that the Structure tool is now applying in this same area and less around this area as the Enhance AI one is. Close the mask. Let's see that tool before and after. Okay, so obviously this is going a little too far, but like I said, I did that just to demonstrate how you can use the mask from one into another tool. If I wanted to affect the opposite, you can also invert it. So if I invert it, you can see that it's now affecting, I'll just turn it up, the outside area. Let's do invert again, put it back, like so. So the mask tool is a very powerful feature that allows you to apply these tools and adjustments to just parts of your images. I'm going to apply a quick vignette here. And if you watched my video from day 1, you'll see my tip on drag the feather slider to -100. Then it gives you a very hard edge vignette, which allows you to then adjust the roundness and the size and the position. Okay, within Luminar AI, you can actually choose the subject and move the vignette around. So something you can't do in Lightroom. Lightroom's vignette only comes from the edges into the center. So I want my vignette to focus on this area and darken the rest. So once I've done that, I just double click to set the feather back to 0 or higher, and then set the amount so it's not quite so extreme. So what that's doing is bringing again that focus into the area where I want to draw people's attention. I would probably do a little dodge and burn here as well. So you're starting to see that these tools for adjusting the contrast are fairly similar each time. So we used them last time to lower the contrast, and now I'm using them to raise the contrast and punch up the image, but also to draw attention to certain areas or away from certain areas. You can see that I'm just using this dodge and burn tool to affect certain areas so that my eye and my attention goes where I want it, which is in this front part here. Click to apply it. Let's turn the histogram off and look at the full size image. So there we have the before and after. This is now my final version. I've added a couple of extra tools, but I'm not going to show you those today. So make sure that you watch my next Luminar AI tutorial all about the creative tools that are going to help you add some style to your images. Just click the video here. If you missed day 1 and you want to go back to the beginning of the challenge and start over, just click here. Your assignment for today with contrast is to replicate what I've done and come up with your own version. If you have any questions about anything in this tutorial, please share them in the comment area below and I will be sure to answer it for you.